So was Iain Glen a good fit for Bruce Wayne in DC Universe's Titans? That answer, for the most part in my experience when reviewing this show, gets some mixed results, but the typically poorly received comments consist of that he's way too old for Bruce Wayne, or he doesn't look like him, I mean what was that accent, and just generally why the heck is this 58-year-old man Bruce Wayne? Where on the other side, of course there are other fans who see how Iain Glen does portray Bruce Wayne well from what we did see of him in Titans Season 2, in mind with the time setting that Titans depicts. So in today's video, you guessed it, I want to go over DC Universe's Titans Bruce Wayne and if he was or wasn't an all-round decent Bruce Wayne. I mean, what exactly was it that DC Universe was going for when there are some who are so sure that he's just not a right fit for Bruce Wayne? I mean, I'll definitely, as usual when discussing and analyzing aspects of shows like this, try and counterbalance as best as I can to see both sides of the table, but draw a firm conclusion that ultimately lands with my insight on the character and utilization of Bruce Wayne and his involvement and casting in Titan Season 2. But first of all guys, before anyone impulsively comments, oh he was trash or this, that and the other, or even both sides of it, try and watch the whole video before expressing your opinion, because I would really love to hear your response on everything I have to say. So let's start with my first impressions of Bruce Wayne being cast for Titan Season 2. I think one word to sum it up would be that I was definitely intrigued, as Iain Glen was an interesting casting choice. I mean, I'm sure many of you at least knew him from his work from Game of Thrones as Ser Jorah Mormont, and as always when a casting is out for a character, fans, with myself included, have their imaginations go pretty wild at the potential and vision of what this character could be when the episodes finally hit our screen. It was clear that we would be getting a much older Bruce Wayne in Titans for sure, and before I get into some detail with that specific aspect of the casting, I think this was one of people's main concerns that many fans questioned, and in lots of videos I go over when diving into certain point of views from fandoms, a lot of the response, feedback or criticism derives initially from expectations, and I do think that's completely fair when taking critique into account, because as fan of these comic book characters and worlds, we all have a vision of a character based on the source material we've read, watched, or just ultimately consumed, so it'd be weird to not even have a form of expectation for a character when being cast on the show. However, more often than not in these situations, it doesn't always hit the mark or feel satisfying enough to an audience member, so when that actor is finally on screen or just cast, especially when someone is playing somebody as popular as Bruce Wayne, usually heavy scrutiny is soon underway. That first aspect of scrutiny, as I previously mentioned, is that Iain Glen being a much older Bruce. Now, is this really so bad? I mean, no. On paper, I don't think it is at all, but yet again, this is where understandably fan expectations come in and subject the portrayal to scrutiny. Batman has had countless iterations, of course, with the series of notable events in his life shifted around different ages, but usually Bruce is in his mid-20s when he comes back to Gotham City after having trained all around the world. Within a few years, he finds his first Robin, that being Dick Grayson, and a handful of years of going around as Robin with Batman, Dick Grayson then leaves Bruce and becomes Nightwing, which ultimately leaves us off with a Batman being in his early to mid-30s before continuing on with the next chapter of his Bat life. So it's safe to say, with a majority of the iterations of Batman and the Robin who becomes Nightwing, things happen at a much earlier time in both of their lives to that of what Titans depicts to us. But while we're discussing this, I think it's always important to take into account with there being one core thing to remember, in that most live action adaptation shows of some of our favorite comic book characters, they do precisely that, adapt, not copy and paste, but adapt the source material in a new and what the audience would hope to be an interesting and innovative way, while kind of staying faithful to the comic book counterpart that we all know and love. So with Titans, we were introduced to the casting of Brenton Thwaites as Dick Grayson, who in this adaptation was still a Robin into his mid-20s, compared to that of when in various source material he becomes Nightwing at around 19 years old. Now this is obviously a huge difference, and in Titan Season 2, Brenton Thwaites is 30 30 years old when he finally becomes Nightwing, and even in season 1, around that age when he's still wearing that Robin costume, which should just speak volumes as to why the Bruce Wayne they chose to cast is in his late 50s. Titans obviously wanted to set itself apart from the version of where in the comic books things are portrayed kind of a lot younger, with Nightwing often being around 19 years old compared to the 30-year-old Dick Grayson we have in the show. Now, this allows the show to explore a bit more of an adult theme, not that I'm saying you can't have that with a 19-year-old Dick Grayson, but having a much older cast definitely adds a different tone to the show rather than imagining all of the older Titans, for example, in the show to be barely into their early 20s. I mean, the feel of the show would be somewhat different, and we can acknowledge that some fans would have preferred it if, the casting was more accurate to the comics, but for me, personally anyway, I don't really mind the direction at all that they took with adapting these characters to be an older cast to their comic book counterparts. So I think I've been over the reason why in my books the age factor of Iain Glen is explainable and fine in the show, but also this seems to spill over to would an Iain Glen Batman or Bruce Wayne even measure up to what Batman is supposed to be like in terms of being able-bodied and skilled in hand-to-hand combat. Well, in my books, of course, there are many examples of this in the comics, and I feel like the Titans show did a great job of that as well. I mean, granted that the show didn't have Iain Glen's Bruce Wayne involved a whole lot, which to me makes sense as the show isn't about him, and his role was more of a complementary inclusion into the story that was weaved in with Dick Grayson's development. There were still scenes that allowed Iain Glen to show off the inner Bruce Wayne and also glint of Batman that he had to offer. And I completely understand that some fans were thrown off initially by his accent, and I'll agree to that one. I mean, at first, there was something off with it. However, I do feel as though it improved throughout the course of the season, but to me, an accent doesn't make or break a role. But the Bruce Wayne that they displayed in the show ticked most of the right boxes for me whenever those moments appeared, few and far between the 13 episodes of season 2. In addition to this, the showrunner of Titans has already discussed how that in season 2 it wasn't really about introducing Batman, even though of course Bruce Wayne is still Batman during the events of the show. The door that they opened with this character opportunity was to explore and focus on Bruce. This allowed Titans to show in various scenes, in the words of Greg Walker, in how Bruce is really good at being Batman, but he's horrible at being Bruce, and how he's kind of taken an aspect of his personality and an identity and focused on that at the expense of being a person that has to deal with relationships, which of course is quite a common theme in many iterations of Bruce Wayne on the screen or in the comics. And although a lot of the scenes we saw of Bruce Wayne in season 2 were manifestations in Dick Grayson's mind, it still allowed us to see Iain Glen's and the showrunner's iteration and focus on this version of Bruce Wayne, and I feel like those scenes were conducted very well and demonstrated successfully in how Bruce has lacked being a person that has to deal with relationships due to his double life and main focus on being Batman. Even in the real scenes between Dick and Bruce came across uncomfortable and almost couldn't get too deep in conversation, and even would shy away from the scenes discussing the blame that Dick had put on Bruce ever since leaving him and disregarding the role of Robin. Now, this is told in the show through the psychological effects on Dick Grayson's life up until this point, having trained with Bruce and the impact that this has had and how it reflects with his relationship with him. Albeit that there was reconciliation in season 2, Iain Glen's Bruce still knew there were veins of truth in the conversation that reflected his inability to have a real relationship or relationships with people, and this was conveyed on screen. And I commend the show and Iain Glen for this, because it was an accurate portrayal of how Bruce hasn't exactly been the best father figure growing up for Dick Grayson, but a great vigilante mentor. I think it's also interesting to acknowledge that he has also not only trained Dick Grayson, but reportedly we're getting Oracle next season, so this Bruce has had Dick Grayson, Barbara Gordon's Batgirl, and now Jason Todd, so he has been around and done quite a few things for some time. Along the line, they even showed snippets of the various highlights of Bruce Wayne's different kind of character personas, from his billionaire playboy, the wise and firm mentor, the ever self-improving vigilante, and also his ability to be very proficient in hand-to-hand combat. Which brings me to this point in the video, and once again, this was in Grayson's mind when it was this somewhat Nightwing realization montage when Grayson was in prison, but that scene where he battles against Bruce was a great feat from the choreography team. I mean, I remember reviewing this at the time and just hoping that it would appease those who thought that this quote-unquote old man Bruce Wayne didn't really have it in him to come across as a Batman who could kick some ass. I mean, the speed in fighting and the way this scene was filmed made Iain Glen's Bruce look like a man you really don't want to mess with. I mean, let alone imagining this scene if he were to be in the Batsuit, which in the comics at that age is honestly no different. So the fact that they successfully had Iain Glen look this way on the show just really gave the audience a taste of how badass his portrayal of the character is. I mean, maybe the scene didn't quite sell everyone, but for me it was a home run of reassurance for the role, because we had seen various elements and aspects of Bruce Wayne up until that point, but this really gave us a glint of Batman. So all in all, I see Iain Glen's iteration of Bruce Wayne on Titans as a decent portrayal and an interesting adaptation of this character that is set in a universe where the timeline of traditionalist canonical events are spread a bit wider over time. I mean, to some fans, the Titans Bruce Wayne may have been a disappointment, but for me, they ticked the right boxes in a way that implemented this character to the main plot relevant of Dick Grayson's past and present struggle, and ultimately just left me feeling that this older Bruce Wayne is a man who is very believable in how he has lived a long grounded vigilante double life, to the point of where I feel as though the show successfully displayed the cracks that through leading that life for a few decades would show, reflecting and focusing on his relationship with his first Robin, which kind of gave us an emotionally grounded psychological iteration. I mean, there are some things that I think that Titans did miss out on with Iain Glen's Bruce Wayne, which who knows, we could possibly see down the line in how we didn't really even get one scene with the real Bruce and his current Robin, Jason, which you would have thought they would have perhaps tried to implement, considering Bruce slumped Jason Todd off on Dick Grayson, and I'm sure I could detail some other things I would have liked to have seen, but ultimately, as to the core reason as to why Iain Glen's character of Bruce Wayne was introduced into Titans Season 2, and that is, as Greg Walker said himself, that you can't really tell a Robin story that doesn't include Batman in some way. I think they achieved that aspect very well. And there we have it, everyone. Those are my thoughts on the Titans iteration and Iain Glen's portrayal of Bruce Wayne. So I would love to know your thoughts on this character and the portrayal down in the comments below. I mean, did you initially kind of feel unsure like I did, but and then along the way really understand the direction they were going, and the way they chose to conduct scenes throughout the course of the season was done in a way that I honestly feel reflected true attributes of Bruce Wayne's personality? But then again, after hearing all of these points, you still may think, nope, the character was just not the way I think Bruce Wayne should be portrayed. Either way, all opinions are welcome down in the comment section, guys. But other than that, if you really did enjoy this Titans video, especially if you got this far, I would really appreciate a little thumbs up on this video, as it just really helps out the content. And of course, subscribe for more bonus Titans videos like this, along with news updates and all kinds of other content. But thank you so much, guys, for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you Titans in the next video. Goodbye.